This episode of Q Point Podcast is pre-recorded, produced and sponsored by Karina Quirk, broker at Next Home Experience.
Different views.
I know your story.
From different Q's.
Incredible job.
He's David Quirk.
You brought it up.
And she's Karina Quirk.
Imagine.
This is
Q Point.
Thank you for joining us for part 2 with Mark LaVerdiere, attorney and business owner at Apex Business Law.
If somebody wants to get into the real estate investment, obviously being a lawyer, I'd probably say you would say hire one first, so you know all the regulations that you've been discussing. But what other things should they be looking at?
If you're a new investor who wants to dive into this world of investing your dollars in real estate as opposed to the stock market, first fundamental is know how to do some math when it comes to this real estate. You need to not necessarily rely on whatever's in the listing or whatever's been provided to you for financials. And you need to do a little market research and have an understanding of what a lot of these things cost. Taxes, for example. Whenever you're looking at a listing, they're going to list the current property taxes. But the reality is that a lot of the towns, after the transaction goes through, will reassess that property on the next cycle when they come through. They might not catch you the first year or the second year, but when they do come through, that appraiser that the town hires is going to look at the last sale amount. And you can bet your bottom dollar you're going to end up pretty darn close to that number. So if you buy a property that's currently assessed at, say, $150,000 and you pay $350,000 or $400,000 for it, then they're going to reassess you at some point. They'll catch up with you and your taxes are going to increase exponentially. And if you model your entire transaction off of that original tax amount, and let's say that you listen to some of the podcasts with these folks out there telling you to just buy for equity, that you don't really need any cash flow. So say you left yourself $300 a month in cash flow, you're going to have a big problem within a couple of years, maybe even 1 year, where you're underwater on the property and you're losing money. So you really need to spend some time and educate yourself on all of the moving pieces before you dive into this, which really isn't that hard. I mean, the AI out there can help you out with a lot of this stuff. And there's a lot of information out there for investors. I think that what happened recently was you had really a lot of people coming in to the market, listening to podcasts, for example, and getting hyped up on it and diving in and overpaying for properties, thinking that they didn't need to have cash flow and that it was an appreciation play, that the property would increase in value, and overpaying. And then all of a sudden, when rents corrected a little bit, people are now scrambling. A lot of people purchased and got loans that were at interest rates that are too high, or they've overpaid for the property and now their rates are going to reset at 5 years, and then they're going to be in a real bad problem because the rate's going to go up to 7.5 or 7 or something like that. So that's the first thing. You have to have a good grasp of the financials. My approach has always been to be over conservative. I would rather lose a deal than pick up a bad deal. So I always model all of my transactions shooting for at least a 20% cash on cash return. If it doesn't give me 20%, I don't touch it. And I've had deals I've passed on because it was 19%. I just don't touch it if it's not 20%.
Does that include like maintenance and plowing of snow and mowing the lawn?
When I model it, now the reality is, as we talked about earlier, what ends up happening is this gets eroded because utilities are going up. People act as though landlords just increase the rent until they can reach heaven. You can't do that. I can put the rent up at whatever I want. It's just not going to rent. So you're limited by the market already. And with the expenses going up, that 20% gets eaten away at over time. There's a lot of little nuances with the finances that people are not tracking that you need to have that 20%, in my opinion, to have the buffer. A lot of investors shoot for 10% or 15% or something. I shoot for 20 because I want to make sure that I have the cushion. I don't want to be unable to sleep at night. The reason for that is exactly the stuff we're seeing and that we were talking about earlier. A lot of these regulations coming in and rent controls. If those things happen, I could probably absorb it barely, but a lot of people couldn't. They couldn't come close to absorbing it. So the 20% for me is a metric that I would shoot for if I was a new investor. I look for 20% cash on cash return. That's my primary metric that I look at. I look at everything else too, but that's the fundamental.
So what is your next step?
If I find a property that hits that metric that I'm looking for, at that point, it's all about trying to figure out how you're going to make that happen. So you need to be aware of the different ways to structure a deal and how to talk to a bank and how to work with a bank on something like that. A lot of banks want 25% down. If you're not experienced, they might want 30% down. So you need to have a plan to come up with some money. And then you have to have a plan for dealing with the bank and negotiating with the bank and making sure you have decent terms that are going to work out for you. You need to watch certain things like prepayment penalties, for example. Let's talk about that for a second. A prepayment penalty can really burn you if you're not careful, because as a new investor, let's say you came in, you overpaid for the property by accident, and you need to exit. You're 2 years in. This is not going well. You need to exit the property. Well, if you agreed to a prepayment penalty, when you sell that property, you're going to owe the bank $30,000, $40,000 more for selling because the cost of funds. They lent you the money. They want some profit back. So a negotiating point is often to tell the bank that you'll agree to a prepayment penalty in the event of a refinance only. So that way you're saying to the bank, hey, look, I'm going to do business with you and I'm going to promise I'm not going to go refinance this loan with somebody else. And if I do, I'll pay you for your time and trouble. But I don't want to pay a prepayment penalty in the event that I sell the building. And oftentimes they'll agree to that because they recognize you need a little bit of mobility as an investor. You need to be able to respond to things. So there are a lot of nuances like that. So just as you said earlier, you do want to engage an attorney probably to help you out with some of this, to help with some of these negotiations. A lot of people don't really do that. They just go buy the real estate and they'll hire a title office to conduct the closing, but they're not looking at that issue. They're not watching it from an investment standpoint. So you need an attorney who understands investment and can kind of give you some advice on those points.
Do you recommend setting up a LLC?
Oh, absolutely. I guess order of operations would be you make sure the math is good and that you can fund the transaction. And now it's about implementing. How are you going to do that? And you want to set up an LLC. It's been a long time since I set up a corporation. I can tell you that. LLCs basically, for almost every instance, have replaced corporations. Corporations are still appropriate in certain situations, but the LLC gives you kind of the best of both worlds, and it gives you the liability protection that you're looking for. So I always tell people when you're setting up a real estate enterprise, first thing we're going to do is create an LLC. The LLC is going to purchase the real estate, and you're going to get an EIN number for the LLC. You're going to go get a separate bank account for the LLC, and the funds need to go to the bank account. You need to be careful to operate it like a real business. Oftentimes I see people buy real estate and they use it like their personal piggy bank. Whether or not I set an LLC up for you in that situation, it's not going to matter, because if you're using the funds through your personal bank account, they can pierce the corporate veil, as they say. It's not rocket science. It's just an order of operations thing. You set up the bank account, the money goes into the bank account, and then you just set up a regular owner draw out of that bank account tied to whatever you realistically think your profit will be. And then you have a nice clean trail to show this company's operating as a company. And the only time I touch a dollar is when it comes out as this regular owner draw, which I can show you a schedule of for the past 5 years. In that situation, you're going to be in a much more secure position in the event of a lawsuit, slip and fall, anything that comes up with that property.
And you're talking about not only a commercial property, but also if you have a home that you're renting, if you have short-term rentals or long-term rentals.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you're renting a home as a short-term rental, you should have that in an LLC too. The caveat I'll give is some people are owner-occupants of like a duplex or something like that. That creates a little bit of a nuance because you're getting a homestead exemption, for example, for taxes. So you lose that when you convert into the LLC. And you also have to be mindful of the timing of this. You can transfer real estate after you already own it into the LLC. But if you have a bank loan, that could be a violation of the terms with the bank. So you probably need to get some kind of consent from the bank to do the transfer. If you do it in front of the loan, then you can notify the bank that ABC LLC is going to be the purchaser. You then become a guarantor of the loan, and then everything's good to go. That's the best way to do it.
You are listening to Q Point Podcast. I'm Karina Quirk, co-hosting with my husband, David Quirk, and we are having a conversation with Mark LaVerdiere, attorney and business owner at Apex Business Law. It's interesting when we're talking about LLCs for purchasing these second homes. A lot of people think that corporations have now bought up all of our coastal properties, although as a realtor, the people that I've worked with are just, they're actual people.
Yeah.
Is that what you find?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's very misleading to some extent, or confusing to people to see all of these companies out there and you think, well, look at this, all the corporations have bought up everything. The reality is, it's just people are coming to a guy like me and saying, hey, I want to buy this as an investment. And I say, Well, we need to create an LLC for you to do that. So the vast majority of LLCs in the state are just owned by individuals, and they don't own much. I would say 95% of the LLCs in the state, if anything, they own one piece of land or something like that, or one house or one duplex, something like that. So yes, if you look at it, you might come away with the belief that corporations have bought your whole town up, but the reality is that's not really the case.
They're just protecting themselves.
Yeah, it's just people protecting themselves. We live in a very litigious society, and I'm an attorney. I know well. I mean, something bad happens, people call and they want to sue somebody, and you have to protect yourself if you're going to be in business. If you're going to go beyond just putting your money in the stock market, you need to protect yourself.
And some people put it into a trust if they're going to pass it down to siblings or grandchildren.
Yeah, there's different trust vehicles out there. A lot of times an LLC is used for the same purpose. Some people choose to put it in a trust. The key part with a trust is that unless it's an irrevocable trust, you're not really getting any of the protections that most people think. I mean, I see a lot of people go with living trust, for example, and they assume that it's giving them some kind of protections, but it's really not. My preferred vehicle has generally been the LLC because, now I say this because I'm a corporate attorney, and if you had an estate planning attorney here, they'd be telling you that trusts are the way to go. I personally like LLCs as vehicles because I can do a lot of estate planning right within the LLC. I can create the LLC. I can put beneficiaries in the LLC. I can structure voting rights and control and all of those things. And the LLC can continue on past the death of the person, can be passed to the children. I can do a lot with an LLC, a lot of the same things that you can do with the trusts. So trusts are appropriate, certainly, in some situations. There's estate planning reasons to have a trust. There's tax reasons to have a trust. There are things that trusts can do with estate taxes that I can't do with LLCs necessarily. So those are, of course, important things to be aware of. But as far as the LLCs that you're seeing out there, a lot of people are using them for family camps, for example. I've done a lot of family camp LLCs where you have a parcel you want to pass on to generations and generations and generations. And so they structure this LLC to give people voting rights and pass it down. Now, I'll tell you candidly, I tell everybody that comes to me with a family camp and that wants the LLC that I think they're fools. It's the best way to destroy your family is to have a family camp that you try to pass on to the next generation. But nonetheless, it's just an example of what you can do with an LLC.
Okay, now that the person owns the property and they're getting ready to rent the property, what are your thoughts on creating a lease?
If you don't have a lease with the tenant, then the tenant's a tenant at will, which means that the Maine legislature has created kind of a lease for you in a sense, in that the rules are governed by the statute. It's the same as a will, for example. If you don't have a will, the Maine legislature has been kind enough to create the terms under which your assets will be divested. Having a lease is important, and you want to have a good lease. You don't want to just go on and have ChatGPT make the lease. You should just contact a Maine lawyer, and you should get a Maine-specific lease, and that way you know what you're doing. A lot of the online programs, you can go pay for a lease, but I don't know exactly what you're getting. I couldn't tell you. And at the end of the day, you don't want to be in a situation where you're in court after having waited, God forbid this statute passes that we're talking about, you waited 6 months and now you finally made it in front of the judge to get the tenant out and you find out that your lease is no good. Those are the realities that many people run into. Same thing goes for sending out notices to quit to tenants if they're not paying you. I see a lot of people send the notice to quit themselves. Then they wait the 30 days and then they come in and bring their file and they say, hey, I sent the notice to quit. Can you evict this person? And we end up telling them that they have a defective notice and we need to send another notice to quit. And they need to wait another 30 days until that notice runs. So some things are okay to do yourself, but most things when it comes to the law are not okay to do yourself or not advisable.
And would you advise to have a lease also for short term?
Yeah, absolutely. If you have, from a pure legal standpoint, having a lease when you sign a short term with somebody is advisable. The practical realities of that differ. You know, a lot of people are on Airbnb, for example, and these people are going to book your unit and good luck getting them to sign any kind of short-term lease. But if you're doing direct bookings, for example, or they're booking with you, you should absolutely have something. In the Airbnb situation, you have a little bit of protection just through that company. They have some control over the renter and they have some control over you. So you go to Airbnb with the problem and by and large, they solve it. If you're just doing direct, then you should have a short-term lease.
So if you are an investor and you do have quite a few properties, how would you select a property manager?
I think that's a very important thing for people to think about when they're acquiring the property. I think that goes back to the math when you're analyzing the property at the front. Even though I self-manage my properties, I always model in about 12% property management fee. And that's because I want to know that if something happens to me, I can hand it off to a property management company and I'm still going to be able to be okay on the numbers. I think if you're a new investor, you're very wise to think about having a property management company help you. Hopefully you've modeled that into the transaction before you acquired the property. And when you're looking at who to hire, it's important that you do your due diligence. You really want to try to look for a very experienced property management company. You want to talk to them and find out how they handle things. How do they handle the security deposits? Do they retain the security deposit? Are they expecting you to handle that piece of it? How many units do they manage? Do they have in-house staff helping them for repairs? And you want to talk to them about things like, what are they going to charge for the base management fee? What do they charge for renting an apartment? Usually that's an additional fee. They'll take 50%, some take 80%. It just depends. You want to know information about repairs and how that's going to work. A lot of them have captive repair companies. So it'll show up on the report that they've hired ABC company to do the work. Well, they own ABC company. So you just want to watch some of those things. There's authorizations as to how much money they can spend on a repair without getting your approval. Those are all things you want to watch for. So I guess the safest thing for a new investor would just be to go to one of the larger property management companies. There are certainly some good small property managers out there, but if I was a brand new investor, I'd be very hesitant to go with somebody who's just starting out or only has a few units, because that's where you can get in a situation, I think, where you don't really have the safeguards that you necessarily need. For example, if you get a bad property manager, I've heard about this before, you could have a situation where they run off with all your security deposits. Well, you have a legal responsibility to pay those security deposits to the tenants. They're the tenants' funds. So if the property manager ran off with your security deposits, you have a big problem. And I've heard of it. I think safest approach is to go to a well-established property management company if you're just starting out.
The other question I had, if you do have a rental, let's just say you have a camp, are you allowed as the personal person to go and stay in that camp that you have as a rental?
You're getting into a tax question here. And to get the pure answer, you're going to need an accountant on here for this. But there is a limit to the number of days that you can spend at that unit. And it's not a very high number, as I recall. So if you stay there for too many nights, you don't qualify for a lot of the write-offs that you would otherwise qualify for.
You are listening to Q Point Podcast. I'm Karina Quirk, co-hosting with my husband, David Quirk, and we are having a conversation with Mark LaVerdiere, attorney and business owner at Apex Business Law. So for somebody out there thinking they're ready to go, they want to buy a first property to invest, what type of property would you recommend in today's market?
I think it's a great idea. And that's how I got started. You heard that I grew up on Section 8. I was in the Army and the military paid for me to go to school and to law school. And my first house was a duplex. That's what I chose to do. And they call it house hacking now. They have the fancy word for it. But at the time, I was going to Eastern Maine Community College right after I got out of the Army. And I had a professor there who told me that he liked me, so he was going to tell me his family secret. And his family secret was that his father had done this and his grandfather had done this. They'd buy a duplex as their first house, and then they'd just buy a few more. And I remember he told me, if you can get yourself to 10 units, Mark, by the time you retire, you have an extra $500,000 to $1 million worth of value that you've accumulated if you've paid everything down. And that's a nice little cushion for your retirement. So I think I was probably 22 years old when he told me that, and that just stuck with me. Once I made my way all the way through all the schooling and law school and everything else, and I got my first job working for the court here in Bangor, I immediately started looking for a duplex. And we moved into a duplex over in Orono. I lived in one side and I rented the other side out. And at the end of the day, I still made probably about $500 a month off of that. And what I did is I just didn't touch that money. I put that money into an account every single month until I had enough money saved up to buy another duplex. And that's what I did. Probably 3 years after that, 4 years after that, I bought another duplex. And then I just repeated the same thing. I didn't touch any of the money that I was making. I put it in a bank account. And that's pretty much how I've done it. I've just rolled the money and I've used that to get the down payments. I think that that is a good way to get into it. If you want to start out as a landlord, it doesn't have to be too daunting. Get yourself a duplex, live in one side, rent the other side out to somebody. And that's a great way for you to learn how to do this too, because you're there every day. You're dealing with all of it anyway. So you see everything, you see how it works. And then as you grow, you'll have a nice base to work from.
And as an owner-occupied landlord, you do have additional protections related to landlord-tenant law. Is that correct?
Yes. There are some protections for owner-occupants that don't apply to other landlords because the concept is if you live there, you should have a little bit more flexibility on what you'll put up with in your building. It's just a great way to get started with investing in real estate, but you definitely want to be aware of the statutes and how things work with tenants. You can't just go kick the door in and tell them to get out if they didn't pay you the rent. There's a procedure you have to follow. And you also want to pay attention to the area you're investing in. In my opinion, you don't want to go buy a duplex in Portland, Maine right now. I wouldn't do that. You just need to be very aware of where you're investing.
Well, thank you for your service. I didn't even realize you served.
Oh, thank you very much.
So tell us a little bit about your Army experience.
Sure. Yeah, I joined the Army right out of high school. I grew up in Eustis, Maine, where they say get useless in Eustis, you probably heard. So I didn't really know exactly what I was going to do out of high school. I just thought I'd join the Army to help get a little common sense. And I joined the service, and I started out in Oklahoma for my basic training. I went to Texas for some advanced training, and I was in air defense artillery. After that, I got stationed in Germany. I was on a Bradley linebacker, which is a type of military vehicle that's not in service anymore. So I was stationed in Germany for a while, and then I did 13 months in Iraq. And then after Iraq, went back to Germany, and then they discontinued my MOS, which was the Bradley linebacker. So they transferred me into a military intelligence unit, and then I went back to Texas for my last year. So it was a good experience for me. I made a lot of great friends. I learned a lot. I would say I came out of the service with a lot of common sense and a lot of confidence that I didn't necessarily have when I was younger. To this day, I have at least 8 to 10 friends that I talk to regularly from my time in the military.
Well, before we let you go, what's your outlook for Maine property owners and investors?
I guess I'm cautiously optimistic for Maine. I think that, as we discussed, there are some statutes that are very concerning. And frankly, if they go through, then I'll lose a lot of this confidence. But I have a lot of faith in capitalism and in the American system that has brought this country to where it is now. And I think that people are just reasonable. And if people have some faith in the system that has existed for a long time, that the investors and the people of Maine can pull through the housing problems and clean a lot of this stuff up. I know that's the case. When I talk to other investors, these are people who are just wired a little bit differently. They're eager. They want to build things. They want to develop things. You just have to let them do it. If you let the market take care of itself, I think that things will go very well. I know for a fact that, you look at our company, I don't slow down. I go all the time. I usually go to bed at 11 o'clock at night, and I'm right there working the whole time. I don't stop thinking about investment. I don't stop thinking about real estate. I'm always doing this stuff. I'm just wired this way. And I know a lot of people are exactly the same way. So if the opportunity's there, if the field of play is fair, then all of those efforts are going to be multiplied across all of those investors who are going to be looking at ways to make this state nicer and to add housing and to create opportunity. There's a trickle-down effect too. As I add units, I hire people. We have probably, I would guess, 20 to 25 people who depend on our companies to pay them most of their income just to support our operations and everything. So as this stuff happens, as units are added and investors are able to grow companies, it has a great effect for the community. It drives revenue in. I think a lot of people have this misconception that landlords are just tucking the money into their pockets. That's really not the case. It's expensive to operate properties. Most of the money gets fed out back into the community through jobs and to contractors and other sources like that. So yeah, I'm optimistic for Maine. I really believe that at the end of the day, there are enough people who understand or who care about the state and who believe in the American system that things can improve here. I think there's a lot of change that has to happen, but I think we can get there. And never underestimate the power of capitalism.
Mark LaVerdiere, attorney and owner at Apex Business Law. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. We appreciate your time. You've been listening to Q Point.
Follow us at qpointpodcast.com or on your favorite streaming app.
This is where you can get the news from the people who make the news.
Make sure to join us next time.
We hope you tune in.
Q Point Podcast invites guests and candidates from all parties to join the conversation. The views, information, opinions, and comments expressed during this program do not necessarily represent those of the host, Q Point Podcast, associates, affiliates, and CQRE LLC.
Thanks for being a part of the conversation. The most important voices aren't always the loudest ones. They're the voices of everyday people, raising families, running businesses, serving their towns. That's who we want to hear from. Share your ideas with us online, and let's make sure those voices are never left out. Find us on Facebook or on X or at qpointpodcast.com. We look forward to hearing from you. Catch every episode at qpointpodcast.com or wherever you stream. Tune in and tell your friends.